The Taliban are part of the global movement of radical Islam. The movement contains many different groups, but they share the same basic ideology. In simple terms, this holds that there is only one true faith, only one true view of that faith, and that society, politics, and culture should be governed only by that view. Radical Islam believes not only in Islamism, the turning of the religion into a political doctrine, but in the justification of struggle, if necessary, armed struggle, to achieve it. Other Islamists agree with the ends but eschew violence, but the ideology itself is in inevitable conflict with open, modern, culturally tolerant societies. Nearly everything about 9/11 and its aftermath, particularly now, is mired in controversy. What cannot be seriously disputed, however, is that since 9/11, though thankfully there's been no further terrorist attack of that scale, radical Islam has not declined in force. What is disputed is why. Is radical Islam a coherent ideology which represents a first-order threat to our security? Or are we facing, despite some common themes, a series of disconnected security challenges, each of which require handling on its own terms based on local circumstances? Is Islamism a problem, or only its manifestation in violent extremism? Is it akin, as I say, to revolutionary communism and must be countered by a combination of security and ideological measures over the long term? Or is that to overstate it, overestimate it, and thus perversely, as some would argue, by the interventions in Afghanistan and Iraq, to elevate its appeal rather than diminish its appeal? This is a fundamental strategic question, and it needs a clear answer. In my view, Islamism, both the ideology and the violence, is a first-order security threat, and unchecked, it will come to us, even if centered far from us, as 9/11 demonstrated. The analysis published recently by Dr. El-Badawi from my institute shows how the roots of Islamism stretch back over many decades, grew in strength long before 9/11, and it examines the links between the ideology and the violence. This is supplemented by the excellent analysis of the ulema state concept by Ahmed Kuru, and by the annual report we publish of jihadist groups, which shows that this is a global challenge and one that is getting worse. The ideology, whether Shia promulgated by the Islamic Republic of Iran, or Sunni promoted by groups on a spectrum from the Muslim Brotherhood through to Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Boko Haram, and many others, has been the principal cause of destabilization across the Middle East and beyond, and today in Africa. Like revolutionary communism, it operates in many different arenas and dimensions. And like it, its defeat will come ultimately through confronting both the violence and the ideology by a combination of hard and soft power. Now, if this is a correct analysis, then especially after the fall of Afghanistan, the leading powers must unite to develop an agreed strategy. And even if initial discussions center around Western nations, China and Russia also have an interest in countering this ideology. And our best allies are to be found in the many Muslim countries, including in the Middle East, desperate to retake their religion from extremism. We need also to assess our vulnerability. COVID-19 has taught us about deadly pathogens. Bioterror possibilities may seem like the realm of science fiction, but we would be wise now to prepare for their potential use by non-state actors. On the other hand, if this analysis is rejected, The alternative is, in effect, to say this is a second-order problem. Where we are directly threatened, we retaliate through counter-terrorism measures, drone strikes, surveillance, special forces, but otherwise we leave alone. But if this is where policy is heading, we have to understand it to its limitations. We need to work out what we mean by not remaking countries from which terrorist threats can arise. I understand it means that we do not do what we tried to do in Afghanistan. The one thing should be understood. Our remaking didn't fail because the people didn't want the country remade. For sure we could have remade better, but Afghans did not choose the Taliban takeover. The last opinion poll in 2019 showed the Taliban with 4% support amongst the Afghan people. They conquered the country by violence, not persuasion. The barrier to nation building is usually not the people, but poor institutional capacity and governance, including corruption, over many years. And most of all, the challenge of trying to build whilst internal elements combined with external support are trying to destroy. But counter-terrorism, on its own, won't remove an entrenched threat. We could seek a middle course. For example, in the Sahel, we could adopt a strategy of assisting countries with security, but also supporting the government's own attempts to develop their nations, because poverty and underdevelopment undoubtedly facilitate the extremists. In a way, this is what we did in Afghanistan post-2014, when NATO's mission went to train, advise, and assist. But even here, this will likely encompass more than conventional counter-terrorism. We need some boots on the ground. Naturally, our preference is for the boots to be local, but that will not always be possible. Western societies and their political leaders have become, quite understandably, deeply averse to casualties amongst our armed forces. This is not a problem for the armed forces themselves, who are brave and extraordinary people, but it is now an overwhelming political constraint to any commitment to Western boots on the ground except for special forces. Yet the problem this gives rise to is obvious. If the enemy we're fighting knows that the more casualties they inflict, the more our political will erodes, then the incentive structure is plain. There is an additional challenge for Europe and NATO. It is clear now, if it wasn't before, that America has decided that for the foreseeable future, it is a very limited appetite for military engagement.